Good morning, Justin. The sun is up. I checked and Bitcoin's running. We can have our coffee, talk about the news. Lots of stuff happening. Today's episode's really fun. It's the 100th time I've done this. So episode 100, special edition. Thanks for being along for the ride. I really appreciate you guys coming. It's been good for my mental health. This is a mental health show. And today we're going to be talking a little bit more about what we talked about yesterday. And if you don't know some of this stuff, if you've never heard it before, if this is new to you, this could change your life today. Today's episode could actually change your life. It's quite something. So first, we talked yesterday about turning the red wave in American politics into an orange tide. And I made an allusion to pissing in the red wave and turning it, yellow piss mixed with red wave gives you the orange tide. And what I meant by peeing was, pee is, of course, your garbage from your body. And we have all these problems in Bitcoin about energy and policy, and some of it can be remediated from this. So there's a bit of like dumping our garbage. But another physical aspect you could be thinking about pissing in the red wave is the moral high ground. So in persuasion, right, and we're going to talk about persuasion today, in persuasion, moral high ground almost always wins. If you're in a moral high ground position, as long as you don't give it up, you can give it up very easily by getting in the mud with someone, get dragged down to their level. Of course, Trump is one of the best ever at getting you in the mud with him. That's one of his skills and talents. And he doesn't really leave many people on their moral high ground. He's really good at getting people off of it. But when we hear morality, we often get confused in this sense, right? And this is especially true for Bitcoiners. So that's why this could help us a lot. And the way I see morality is that it often gets pushed into the philosophical realm, right? So often when you're talking about morality, you end up talking about philosophy. And if there's anything we don't need in Bitcoin, it's more philosophers, right? We have a lot of philosophers in the industry, and they've been there from the beginning. And they're great, we appreciate them, but today we're not on morality as philosophical. We're going into morality as psychological. So not necessarily a hard science either, but different, right? We're not talking about philosophy, we are talking about psychology. And there's a pretty big difference in how morality plays out in these things. We're not just talking about what is more moral, which is the philosophical approach. We're talking about how morality can be leveraged to get a certain outcome. And we've talked about the principles of persuasion before on this show, but mostly from the idea of persuasion. So how do you butter people up, right? How do you get them ready to basically do what you hope they would do or what you intend for them to do? And we've talked about it in terms of marketing, how persuasion works. And the idea of persuasion comes from a fellow named Bob Cialdini. And he's sort of the modern grandfather of marketing and all of this kind of group persuasion. He's a consultant for hire, and you can hire him anytime. And he gets hired in politics a lot. You can actually, there's signatures, you can tell when he's at work. He's kind of the great monster of this group. And some people say that when Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election against Donald Trump started to paint him with the dark picture, it's dark and all this stuff, and it really caught on, that was Bob Cialdini being hired to help her modify her attack vector on Donald Trump. So no comment about his politics and who he worked for. I just mean to say that he's a sought after, talented person who gets how language works, gets how persuasion works. And, from an apolitical point of view, he's really well respected in this whole field. And these are the 6 principles of persuasion that he shared with the world, that he wrote a book about, and describes these as the only real things that work in marketing and persuasion and the things you need to really rely on. And there's no real order to them. It's these 6 buckets. I'm going to put them in order today as we go through the news, just so you see how they can be consequential and sort of relate to each other. But here they are, the 6 principles of persuasion. So the first one, the first appeal to the first appealing persuasive technique that can be used is an appeal to authority. We've all seen this work. It has its limitations, of course, and those limitations are becoming more and more obvious, especially with the way we've organized authority in a credentialist world. So one of the great parts of what we're seeing in American politics is just the physical degeneration of the leaders. Physical, mental. These guys are really sort of bottom of the barrel, maybe enough brain cells to keep themselves, to keep being able to speak in public and things like that. But not quite, because yesterday in Philadelphia, the president of the United States went and campaigned with the Senate candidate, Fetterman. Fetterman is the one we've spoken about a lot on the show because he had a stroke and he can't form sentences anymore. He can't really have a conversation. And we keep mentioning how CNN, when they talk about him, they get their doctor, Sanjay Gupta, and he'll come on CNN with a model of his brain to show where it doesn't work. And it's like big parts of his brain don't work, right? He's like, this doesn't work and that doesn't work. And then, of course, we've got President Biden, who, I mean, I don't need to give you more stories about his sundowner moments and the flare-ups of the Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever's going on there. I'm not diagnosing him from afar, but it's so often now that it's pretty clear there's a major issue. So yesterday in the United States, Joe Biden, who no one wants him around during these primaries, he's so unpopular that everyone says, don't come and campaign with me. They're saying, stay away, because he's toxic. The only guy who said, come around is this Fetterman guy, right? So Fetterman, one can imagine, not the sharpest knife in the drawer right now. And whoever's on staff clearly said, like, this is all we got. So at one point, a journalist, and he can't take interviews. Fetterman can't take interviews because the one interview he did, it had to be assisted through a printer, a computer, and AI. And that's the closest he's gotten to an interview during the whole campaign. And I call it the first ever interview of a transhuman in politics, because it was an AI assisted interview. He didn't do it alone. So I believe that was the first ever transhumanist political speech, right? So what authority does a transhumanist have in politics? We'll see. I think it's hilarious that he might beat this television star, Mehmet Oz. Imagine you're a television star, you're a doctor, all kinds of things going for you. But you might lose to a brain dead guy. How does that feel? It's pretty funny on both sides. I like it. It's good. It's good. So we've got these two cases of, and then yesterday he goes, Biden was there and he got another angry old man moment. Fetterman ran away from journalists. It was all caught on camera. The journalists came to ask them questions. They're obviously an ice cream shop, right? Biden medically needs to have ice cream a few times a day, it looks like, because that is the prescription for people who have dementia and Alzheimer's, because it sort of calms their anger down and reminds them of good times and satiates them. So for a long time, it's been a prescription, which always is funny because the media covers almost every one of Joe Biden's ice cream shop visits. And regularly just reports on the flavor he got. not that it's like, this is what they serve people who got some problems. So yesterday, Fetterman runs away from the journalists because he can't answer questions. But Biden decides to talk to them. And they're asking him, why does no one want to see you on the campaign trail? Why is it only Fetterman, the guy who had the stroke? And he says, he loses it. He just starts mumbling. He has a sundowner moment. He's angry, typical of people with this condition. So he starts yelling and screaming and says, there's something like, he mumbles something, 15 people want me to run for them. Now there's hundreds of people running for seats in the midterms in a few, hundreds. And he said, 15 people want me. So all this to say that authority as a persuasive technique isn't going anywhere. But when we get back to pissing into a red wave, having the moral high ground, right? To physically be able to do that, you've got to have the high ground. So to have the high ground here is pretty simple, right? It's pretty simple. And particularly when Bitcoiners are promoting a system where the actual authority is a mathematical formula that most people can understand. You have to have some advanced mathematical education to really be able to read the mining reward formula, which I've written down here. But it's not that hard to understand. Like anyone with a high school mathematics, anyone who's completed high school and mathematics would understand the formula. So it doesn't require a huge burden to learn, but it is sort of the authority of the network, right? And we're not actually appealing to any credentialism here. We're not putting our eggs in the Joe Biden basket. We're not putting our eggs in any system that would have to produce people that would need a credential in order to have the authority for us to be led by them. It made sense in an analog world, right? Of course. But as we know, entropy sets into all systems and they die. And what we see here when we see the, basically there isn't enough brain power between the two of them, between the president and the Senate candidate, to even answer one lowly journalist. I mean, there isn't, right? There literally is not enough brain power between the two of them to come up with one single press conference. So the appeal to authority here becomes weakened when you don't have this moral high ground. When it's clear to everyone that they're brain dead, right? You lose a lot of ability to persuade using this technique. So I'd say win for Bitcoin, honestly. Anyone who takes a closer look at it can see. And of course, we have so much momentum in this field because of how we've seen medical choices that have been twisted over the years, much more conversation. Not that medicine has some troubles. The conversation's not there anymore. The conversation has gone to all the data. All of it is garbage. All of it, just all the data, like the data, and I mean it. Not like a finding from one study. The methods and processes are corrupted, and that means that I heard this guy yesterday, a Danish doctor who was part of this thing on the vaccines. We're not going to talk too much about vaccines and blah, 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 but what this guy, he was one of the people that has come out and criticized them. He was one of the most respected doctors in Denmark and has pointed out that in Denmark, they have something like, I think the number is 15,000 doctors, but I'm making it up. I don't remember what he said in the interview. It was around that number. And he says the pharmaceutical companies have bought about a third of them, right? But the top third, the oldest, most senior. And right there, that's how they've polluted the whole system, because all these doctors listen to the doctors above them, and they cost about 100 grand each to corrupt, right? So it's really not expensive. Like 15,000 times 100 grand, you get $15 million, you get a whole country's medical system to follow what you want, right? That's his argument, right? That's the argument he makes. So, of course, the pandemic has done more for destroying the credentialist appeal to authority. Now, the listening to authority, that part of persuasion will never go away. That's the operating system of the human mind, right? We look to authorities in order to help make decisions. And authorities can be mathematical formulas, right? Of course, that's what a lot of people are after. They're after the simplest version of a rule which they can follow, which is what computers use, obviously. And we have all this stuff about AI moving really quickly and advancing really quickly. On my story, we've talked a little bit. I'm a science fiction writer. I have a science fiction story coming out. One of the great reasons why Bitcoin works in my future world is because the AI recognize it as money easily, right? They understand the formula, and to them, it's an authority of how to count human commercial activity. That's it, right? They can count human commercial activity, therefore good enough for them, and they go with it. And basically all commerce is a human with their AI, just having deals, making deals on everything, right? Transacting all the time. So appeal to authority, win for Bitcoiners. Now, one of the reasons why authority has been so crippled is because this whole aspect of scarcity, right, another way to persuade, has also been tarnished. So scarcity is just this human desire for luxury goods. Once you see something as rare, psychologically, you have a desire for it. You're persuaded to want it. And we see this in advertising all the time. That's why you get a, that's why when people say charge more, you can actually make more money, right? That whole psychological aspect of giving something away makes it not desirable, right? If something's free, then it becomes less desirable because it's assumed that it's not scarce. And scarcity is something humans want, and scarcity is something humans value. So we now have, this is from CNN yesterday, you've got Chris Hayes, who is, one of the worst journalists in America. I read it for the laughs. Like, I read Chris Hayes regularly for the laughs. I think it's funny. It's hilarious. I can't, it's stand-up comedy to me at this point. Most of CNN is stand-up comedy, but Chris Hayes in particular, he's like their headliner. He closes the show, right? This is what he says yesterday. He goes, this is an actual quote on TV. We find ourselves in a situation where keeping gas prices low is key to preserving and strengthening the future of our democracy. And so here we are. Hence, Biden releasing oil from the reserves today. So obviously he's pulled a rhetorical trick here. He's saying obviously Democrats are, in his mind, the only demonstration of democracy, and that whatever we need to do for them to win is good enough. So what he's actually talking about here is manipulating energy environments, energy markets even more, right? To either fake scarcity, or in this case, pretend there isn't scarcity, right? That there's more than there is and all that. So the economics change. And right away, you can understand that this doesn't make any sense for anyone. And by making something more available, by manipulating political forces, you actually show that it's elastic and that the scarcity isn't as hard as you thought. And that it's really just about someone's decision to do something or not that makes something scarce or not. When you make it so explicit, right, the idea of it being scarce becomes lost. You're more curious about why you're getting screwed over than about why something is actually scarce. The history of oil actually goes into that realm. They call it fossil fuels. There's nothing fossil about it, right? There's nothing to do with dinosaur bones or anything like that. Nothing. Like, that was made up because at the time they were finding those dinosaur bones. It was the 1800s. It was an obsession. Dinosaur bones were being found everywhere. It was a big deal. And there was a big seminar on what is life, what is the, all this stuff was happening in the late 1800s. We had all the people racing to find out the atomic structure. Chemistry was advancing really quickly. You had Einstein just a few years away, and quantum physics and all those kinds of things. So it's a great period of discovery, trains, electricity, everything happening at once. So they had a lot of these seminars and congresses and conferences and meetings and all that kind of stuff, just like we do in Bitcoin, right? Tons of conferences and meetings and stuff like that, because it's the exciting thing that has people motivated. We're going to talk about that more in a second in the next session. But what you've got here is a situation where you got a situation where they're manipulating a scarce resource by language to make it more scarce, right? The fossil fuel thing was a delegation sent by Rockefeller to this Congress to argue that it was part of life because it had, carbon-based something. And it said it fit their definition. So he said, well, that's a good way to make it sound scarce, because they were trying to manipulate the price at the time. They knew it was easy to get. That was the original spindle top, put a little straw into the ground and the oil gushes out, right? When they found oil in Texas and they drilled down, they couldn't shut it off, right? There was so much pressure that it released that it just came out forever. And it was like that everywhere. And, it was no different than bringing water to places. And the original psychology around oil was that it was as abundant as water and was sort of everywhere. And it might not be in one place, just like farmers would find that there wasn't water under that part of their farm, but they'd find it over there. And we found a lot of oil in America. It's not everywhere, not quite as abundant as water, but the reserves are massive, right? And we were told our whole lives we'd run out by here, run out by then, run out by this. It's where's the dinosaur bones? That's real, right? That was all manipulated, which is hilarious. So, of course, scarcity, Bitcoin, moral high ground, right? This whole exercise is to show in these principles of persuasion who has the high ground, right? So these principles of persuasion don't change, but whoever has the high ground can win. So is our formula of 21 million proof of scarcity? Of course, right? So that's easily with an authority. Credentialism doesn't work anymore. easily within scarcity and the manipulation of the petrodollar, financial engineering, mixed in with the actual inventory of gas. People don't buy it, right? The next one, reciprocity. Oh, one more thing about that. Here's how bad it's even getting, right? Here's how bad it's even getting. In Sri Lanka, we've spoken about Sri Lanka a few times on this show. Sri Lanka is the furthest along in this collapse trajectory. Sri Lanka ran out of paper last winter for kids to go to school, so there was no school. The government has completely stopped working. They're gone. They got chased out of the country. They don't have raw materials. They don't have energy. They banned fertilizers this year, which is why they had a bunch of riots. But here's what's going on there now, right? This is pretty chilling. So Sri Lanka first on this collapse situation. Now they've got a digital ID with a QR code to ration their weekly amounts of fuel, right? So they're tying identity, digital ID, to inventory of fuel and are more or less already living in the nightmare that a lot of Bitcoiners, a lot of people have about the Vax Pass and what that would have led to. And here in this case, we have the climate energy emergency being turned into a government ID scheme. And people are, willingly going with it. So they wanted the fuel, they'll get the thing. Is this coming to America? Well, look, it turns out this is what people are saying, that America itself is going to have a natural gas shortage this winter, which means that those assurances to Europe maybe aren't as solid as we thought they were. Because if America is running out of natural gas, they're not shipping it so that Europeans could get it. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? So who's going to be without enough energy? And are they going to be like Sri Lanka within a matter of weeks, months? Who knows, right? Who knows? But nevertheless, this manipulation of scarcity, tying IDs to it, right? I mean, Bitcoiners, moral high ground, it's not even close, right? We're way ahead on that one. We're way ahead. The next one, reciprocity. Reciprocity. So what is reciprocity? Well, reciprocity is, basically people doing things for others indebts them quite a bit. And depending on the person, if you're a young person starting in their career and you go out of your way to do a favor that no one asked you to do for someone who's senior in a workplace or whatever, it could drive that person crazy. I've seen it, right? In Japan once, I paid a bill for the Japanese embassy in Canada. They were really, they're trying to gather information and intelligence and using me as a source. They were spies mostly. They have their jobs, but they're spies. Not 007 spies. They write stupid reports. They're office spies, right? But they're cultural attaché. It is that, right? Whatever Hollywood gets about that part is correct. So, but I have no problem. I knew what's happening, and they're fun people, and they're friendly, and we would chat and all this stuff. And one time they would always take me out, right? And one time I decided I would pay for them. One of the early times I decided I would pay for them. They had paid for me, and I just paid the bill for the whole table. And the amount of guilt and the eagerness with which they wanted to repay me lasted for years. I mean, they never forgot it, right? They felt so bad because they get to spend their government's money, and that's how they thought of this stuff. And it was quite a large bill. We ate this, that, and I just said, well, I'll pay it, right? There's a million examples I have in my life like that. But basically, if you do favors for other people, a lot of people will feel like they must do a favor back to you. And this is a very persuasive technique. When you go, salesmen always learn this. Salesmen always learn this when they sell cars. They'll offer you something first, right? They'll offer you free whatever. Let me get you a coffee. Let me get you a water. Well, all salesmen know that if you get someone to say something yes to one free thing, their mind is now open to making you happy as you try and sell them something, right? This is an old technique and very not controversial. But reciprocity really does work. Now, let's look at what's going on in the US education system. We talk a lot about the Arizona election and on this show, just because the candidate in the Senate is a big-time Bitcoiner, and the candidate for governor is one of the most talented politicians I've seen in a long time and can break the mold. Well, the and the contrast between the Democrat and the Republican candidate in Arizona is hilarious. Hilarious. You got like kind of a mousy woman who has moronic uptalk. I don't know what I'm going to do today, you know, like all this kind of stuff, versus the other candidate who's a trained television voice, and it's melodic, like hypnotic. You can't, you just want to keep listening. It's like velvet, right? Versus this mousy looking, you know, we're not, you know, this is not a show to compare people's looks, that's for sure. But nevertheless, the contrast is crazy. And she's very poorly spoken. So yesterday she got caught saying the following, because one of the big issues in the Arizona debate is about school choice, which means, is it about public schools versus the charter school system? One system, the charter school system, would give coupons to parents to spend on education as they see fit, versus the public school, which is you go there because that's your zip code and they pay the whole bill and you don't have any choices, right? So the Democrat candidate says, and she's promoting the system. Remember, she's promoting public schools. Her answer when they ask her, you know, well, what about choice and what can they do? And her answer was, well, some children will always be stuck in failing schools. Maybe it's true, but you don't say it out loud. You don't say it out loud. She said it out loud. So of course she got hammered and it was awful. But there again, it shows this willingness to be reciprocal, right? Maybe it is even the truth, right? What she's saying is probably the truth, right? Even in a voucher school, charter school system, not every kid, it's just mathematically impossible for every single person to have a good outcome, right? It's not going to work that way. But what she says here, says it out loud, whether it's true or not, shows this reciprocity piece. And even further, because of the attention this campaign is getting, it's sort of happening all over the country. The head of the federal school union is now going to campaign, just like Joe Biden is trying to campaign with Fetterman, the Senate candidate. This teachers union head is trying to go around the country to rally support for her candidates, and everyone's saying, no, don't do it. Because of course, reciprocity, you've got one group of people, right? You've got one group of people saying to parents, I will give you money. I will give you money to shop and do things, right? So right away, you see that the formula changes. Now, for Bitcoiners, the reciprocity thing is really interesting because we're talking about education, and we know that in Bitcoin, we didn't have the luxury of having any formal education in our system. There's no such thing existed. And we had to do it ourselves. And much like the network is a P2P network, we took on P2P modalities, P2P posture when it came to teaching people. The meetups, the one-on-ones, the amount of private conversations. I mean, who in Bitcoin doesn't spend their whole day talking about Bitcoin to complete strangers? Who doesn't do that? Right? It's not that I can tell you now I spend most of my days talking to complete strangers about Bitcoin, but that's not bragging because everybody does it in Bitcoin. It's not just me, it's everyone. We all do it. We happen, if you're like any one of us and you've been in this industry for a while, you can't help but tell the person who made you coffee about Bitcoin. You can't. It's impossible. And that's why the events are such a big deal, right? The events are the education hub. It's about meeting with the person who first taught you about this aspect of Bitcoin that you didn't know. And it's all this kind of high school homecoming, all that stuff at once, right? I've often said it's like the entire university experience, the events condensed into a couple of days, because it has all the markings of reciprocity, thanking people, being happy to see someone because they did something for you, having someone be happy to see you because you did something for them. All this stuff goes on all the time, right? That's what the events are really about, right? They're about these connections. It's about this person led me into this whole part of the rabbit hole that I didn't know about. Now I know all these people and can talk about all these things with other people. And the whole aspect is really hand-to-hand combat about education around Bitcoin. Even when we do the large events with the huge stage and the tens of thousands of people, and it looks like a big zoo. In fact, it's a bunch of small conversations that make it happen. There's a big stage, and those stages are usually there to talk about big ideas and have the really interesting people talk about this stuff, and you can meet them and talk to them. But the aspect and the back and forth, the P2P nature of education is another one of these moral high ground cases where there's no amount of education from the public system, the charter system, none of it can compete with what Bitcoiners have done in education. I see education as like a 3-point trajectory for evolution if everything goes perfect, and it goes from the public system to the charter system, which I think is good for now, right? It's an increase. It's going to fix most people. Unfortunately, you basically have to have a good family, or at least one engaged parent to make the charter school system work, right? It fails people who don't have a single parent who's interested in their education. And unfortunately, that's a lot of people, and that's reality, and we have to deal with it. And the only way to deal with that is what we see in the Bitcoin world. You've got guys like Isaiah Jackson, who has been running his summer camp for kids around Bitcoin for years now. I think, Jack Dorsey is one of the sponsors of it. He goes to the Marcy projects in Brooklyn, a few blocks where I used to live, where Jay-Z grew up in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, and teaches kids there. So there's a hand-to-hand aspect that Bitcoin has pioneered for education at scale, like at this scale. I mean, there's always been private tutoring. We did not invent private one-on-one teaching, for sure. We didn't invent it, but we've made it popular again. We've brought it to the forefront as the primary vehicle and system to educate people beyond classes, courses, all that stuff. Look at the amount of free stuff given away in Bitcoin education, right? Does Jameson Lopp get money for his guide page on how to learn about Bitcoin and go down the rabbit hole? No. Well, I mean, he makes money doing other things related to that because he did that, but no one paid him to do that, right? Now, just like that's how reciprocity works. He did something really good for the community. Bitcoiners, being human beings with brains, say, I'm going to reward that guy, right? I'm going to give him some kind of a fun experience because I can see that that was helpful for the community, right? So it's around and around we go. So moral high ground, easily on authority. Moral high ground, don't even have to say it on scarcity. Reciprocity, the education puts us in another realm, and we are basically charting the future of education. After it evolves again, we're one step ahead, right? We're one step ahead because our system can handle people that don't even have parents looking out for them, right? We can be big brothers, big sisters, mentors, all that stuff as we go into the future, because good news is we're not teaching anything too complicated. We're teaching the basics of financial literacy and the basics of saving money. And, everything is economics. Everything is economics. I saw this thing on CNN the other day where they were trying to compare white people and black people. And they were saying, well, white people, politically, they're really just worried about the economy, and that's the only thing. Whereas black people, they're interested in housing and this and that. And stop. It's all economics, right? There's no reason why. CNN should break them apart. They break them apart because what they're really discovering from their research is that a lot of people in the African American community don't even connect the two, right? They think social education, because that's how this stuff is presented in mainstream society, right? That's presented as separate subjects: education, healthcare, social justice, as all separate subjects to economics. No, it's economics. It's just one subject. If you have good economics, the other stuff is solved, right? It's the same subject, the exact same subject. So, when people present it that way, they're not. You can't teach one-off social justice. You can't. You can teach economics, and then you'll understand why the outcomes are so terrible and why you can get social justice if you fix some of the economics. But it's just economics. It's just economics. It's all economics, right? And economics are psychological, and that's why we talk about it this way, right? It's not philosophical, it's psychological. So reciprocity, Bitcoiners winning. The next, social. We got a lot of funny stories here. So it turns out Elon Musk is going to fire like 75% of the Twitter staff. That's what the Washington Post leaked yesterday. Meanwhile, Musk also tweeted a photo of the Three Musketeers crossing their swords, and the Three Musketeers being Kanye with Parler, Trump with Truth Social, and Musk with Twitter. And in the backdrop of that is Jack Dorsey, who just released the plans for Blue Sky. Right? Blue Sky sounds like it's going to allow any one of these platforms to interact in a common venue, in a common agora, in a common public place. So that identity is now portable across these channels, and you can choose algorithms and all that. But it looks like you'll be able to use any one of these in one system. And so right away, you know, this social persuasion is really like groupthink, which we talk about a lot here, right? How groupthink works and how it functions. Well, so much has been silenced on Twitter for years now that groupthink is more, when you don't let people talk, it just becomes angry, stressed, right? No one's getting anywhere. I guess today is the 2-year anniversary of the Hunter Biden kill it story, right? Is anyone talking about how 2 years ago, anyone on, you know, both sides, is that conversation coming through in social? It's not, right? It's not. No one's talking about how 2 years ago all the media companies said, we don't see anything here, right? Nothing to see, right? That didn't happen. Blue Sky could save us. So hopefully, right? Hopefully. What about liking, right? Liking. So that's another one that is, you know, you're more likely to be persuaded by someone if you like them than if you don't like them. So let's look at the UK for a second. So the UK's Prime Minister resigned yesterday, Liz Truss. She'd been in for a few weeks. You know, people are saying it's a globalist coup, it's a takeover, that it's all the Brexit people, the Remainers that have taken over the situation over there. But who likes any of these people, right? Who likes any of these people who are formulating you know, tax breaks that are actually going to destroy people's pensions, but nobody knows? And then what about the energy? And nobody knows about that. And then it's a power struggle, and who's in charge? And then when they get in charge, they're smiling because they're at 10 Downing Street, which is like their official residence for their prime minister in the UK. It's a fiasco, right? It's a total fiasco. And it looks like people are done with all these parties, Labour, Tories. We see the same thing in America with Democrat and Republican, and how a third party candidate has great potential right now, great potential. And in the UK, we're there as well. And most of these politicians are absolutely hated. Meanwhile, we've got the potential for a new party. A lot of people talking about Nigel Farage creating a new party and becoming the prime minister shortly, soon, any day. Now, right away, Nigel Farage spoke at Bitcoin Amsterdam last week, has a really open mind now to Bitcoin. I met him years ago, walking on the street in New York City, back to my office at CoinDesk, walking with Pete Rizzo on the street. Pete didn't know who Nigel was at the time, and Pete and I were pretty much just finished our conversation. I said, Pete, go in the building, I gotta talk to you. He was having a beer outside of a pub that I used to go to regularly downstairs from the office. And I said, Nigel, you know, and I knew a bunch of people in common, and he knew the old Prime Minister of Canada, and I'd worked for him. So right away, we were buddies, right? Didn't take long. And this would have been 2017. And I said to him, this was just after Brexit, just when Trump took office. And I said to him right there, and he hadn't gotten England out of the EU at the time. He was still sitting as an EU parliamentarian. I said, this is all you got to do, man. You just got to tell them you're taking donations in Bitcoin, and they'll lose their minds and kick you out. just trigger them, right? And he liked the idea. We didn't do it. But nevertheless, This is a guy who, his followers love him. He's now moving further into the Bitcoin world. So Bitcoiners look like they're going to have, a politician that, of course, some people hate. Like, I don't want to say that he's loved and others aren't. But from my personal experience with the guy, I'd say it's mostly the media and the frame of him and the fear brought with the uncertainty around Brexit that would ever give the impression that this is a bad, mean person, right? Or that he's unlikable. He's one of the warmest, funniest, friendliest people I've ever met. And I think he really will be a really great candidate. Justin says, Tulsi Gabbard talked with Joe Rogan about why third-party candidates have had such challenges making inroads in U.S. governments. Yeah, what did I'm curious. I watched it. I don't remember what was said. I think has a lot to do with party budgeting, right? So in the United States, money does make a difference in the political campaigns, and it's unlimited funding. If anyone didn't know that, then welcome to America. It is unlimited funding, which I'm for, right? Citizens United, there was a legal case in Florida years ago, which determined that because corporations were people and they pay taxes, and because they can't vote, right? They don't have the legal right to vote. Their only way to participate in the US electoral system is through money, and therefore it is their right, and you can't limit it. So no use arguing, right? No use arguing. And I don't mind that one country in the world has this unlimited thing, because the United States is the major leagues of politics because of the money. There's just more money, right? So that's what's evolved the whole sport of politics in America to the level that it's at. And third-party candidates just have a real trouble. You look right now, we talked about the Blake Masters versus, that's the Arizona Senate race, Blake Masters, Bitcoiner, versus Mark Kelly, astronaut. Mark Kelly, I think, has spent about $100 million, and Masters is only at around 6 or 7 million. So you don't need the same amount, but it's really hard to compete with that kind of coverage, because they buy everything. They buy every commercial, they buy every radio ad, and people get so sick of it, so it works against them, right? The budget can work against you, but it's still hard to overcome. So that's my only insight into why third party. And I guess there is a reason why you want two party, right? It is good to shrink the overall menu, I guess you can say, right? To make it a contrast, but we don't do that anymore. It used to be a really great contrast on fundamental issues. Now it's just a contrast on feelings and accusations and slant and slander and all that kind of stuff. So it's not exactly the same thing. But nevertheless, when it comes to just the persuasion about money, right? That's what's interesting to us Bitcoiners. The persuasion around money is that people hate money now, right? People love money, but they hate dollars. They hate what it does. They hate the anxiety that's now infected the system. And Bitcoin is fresh, it's new, and the antagonism, the likability index is way higher. Right? The likability of Bitcoin is much higher than the likability of dollars. It's not even close. It's not even close, right? People like me, and I think everyone watching this, or maybe not yet, but some people watching this, love Bitcoin. I mean, we love it. Like a person, we love it, right? I love money, therefore I love Bitcoin. But dollars, it's baggage. It's all the baggage. That's why we call this show The Breakup. That's literally why we call this show The Breakup, right? It's because it just comes with all these bad strings attached. You don't want to have to deal with all this baggage. Like you don't want that stuff, right? That's where it came from. And I'll even tell you further where the name of this whole thing came from. The whole show, The Breakup, and why I thought setting it in relationship terms was important going forward. Because it's our next story. It's about consistency. You guys see this one? Those are, my icon's okay. It's like arrows constantly hitting their target. That's the best I can come up with. So here's something that's changed. China is having its big Congress. These happen, I think, once every 5 years or twice every 10 years or something like that. And it's like 400 people, the Communist Party, and then it's, they pick all the people above them right up until Xi is reacclaimed as the leader. And he gave a speech as he was reacclaimed yesterday, and it was mandatory watching, Right? If you're in prison, if you're in school, if you're a basketball team, you don't have to watch this speech. Imagine in America, we all had to watch. We had to watch the inauguration address. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, people like to watch. We don't have to watch it. They had to. Weddings were interrupted. Weddings. There's pictures of like a whole wedding party watching what he had to say, you know? Here's what he did in the whole thing, though. He went on and on and on about security and basically for the first time ever said the economic progress is no longer the number one goal. From the time that Mao left until now, the number one goal always for what's going on in China was economic growth. They changed it, right? They changed it. Now it's all security. Security took over. It's COVID, it's America, it's war, it's increase military budget, it's make Chinese safe abroad, right? It's continue what we have going in Hong Kong because now it's safe. Security, security, security. Mentioned again and again. Well, I wonder why they're not talking about the economy. It turns out this morning that they're now selling dollars to stabilize the yuan, right? They're already fighting the fiat currency war against the United States because things have changed. We've got, at the same time, speaking about consistency, what's going on in the UK, right? Speaking about consistency and what's going on in the UK, this is from Bloomberg today, right? The pound has been in use for over 1,000 years. With all of these crazy politicians and everything going on here, right? It's become more volatile than Bitcoin. The pound is now more volatile than Bitcoin. The one that is more consistent is Bitcoin, right? Consistency is a big part of persuasion. It's why we do the show every day here, right? It's important to be able to speak like this every day. And this part here, China, the money, that's where I came up with the name, the Breakup. Because China, when we looked at early Bitcoin, it was an amazing feeling to see it growing in China and America at very equal momentums and very equal thrust, right? It felt like there was like help, right? That it was being gathered by this other big superpower, not a government, just the people. And they were driving it forward. And I noticed a major advantage they had, a major advantage over the American Bitcoiner. It's this. China has a culture, right? And it doesn't necessarily come from the Chinese Communist Party. They have a real culture. It's an old country. Money and what the money is called and what it is and who made it and who printed it has nothing to do with national pride or their feeling about their country or their relationship with their country, right? They didn't care. There was nothing sentimental about holding Bitcoin and not caring if the yuan died. They had seen their government screw them over, be inconsistent with their money many times. They devalued it. They'd done crazy things to it, which meant that while they might like China as an idea, as a culture, all that other stuff, they didn't give a shit about the money. Who cares? They went to Bitcoin hard in the early days. They went to Bitcoin hard in the early days for that reason, right? What do they care? What do they care? And when you compare it to Americans, even the earliest, most insane Bitcoiners, some of them were really patriotic. And nothing wrong with patriotism. Well, there can be, but in general, nothing wrong with patriotism. I promote it. I think it's good. It's a problem when you think that some money that's printed is actually a stand-in for culture that needs to be preserved, right? And Americans had a disconnect there where they, of course, love their country, but any insult to the dollar was treated as an insult to America. They're not the same thing. You can love America. I love America. I love it. Love it. Warts and all, right? Not the politics, not all that stuff. The people, the problems, the good things, the achievements, all of it, right? America. You can love America and not give a shit about the Fed Reserve. You understand that. They're not related. They're not related. They're different things. And Americans have a problem with that. It's a major problem. It's an impediment to our orange tide. It really is. And that's why I chose to make the show called The Breakup, because All people have to realize is that you can break up with the dollar and still love America. You don't have to love both of them at the same time. So that's what's going on, right? So here it is. These are the principles of persuasion, all 6 of these. If I've done my work right, you'll see that we have the high ground on each and every one of these as Bitcoiners, right? Which means that we are more persuasive than the incumbent system. And we do it without the credentialist appeal to authority. We do it with actual scarcity that intellectually you can keep in your mind. It's not like oil and is it from dinosaurs, but why is it expensive? And they made a decision and now I can't have it, and OPEC and who knows. Reciprocity, right? We have gone and done hand-to-hand combat, and now proportionally we can perpetuate that through the world, right? Exponential growth allows for actual P2P learning around Bitcoin and the spread of Bitcoin through word of mouth and from person to person. We can actually do that. We're well on our way, well on our way. Social, well, it looks like Jack Dorsey, great Bitcoiner, is actually going to put the keys in the ignition and allow these other platforms to help. And it looks like the new owner of Twitter, who's a Bitcoiner, who didn't sell any Bitcoin in Q3, is on board, even using the same language he used for Bitcoin. In the end, it was inevitable, Elon Musk said, right? In the end, it was inevitable. Likability, right? I mean, like we got Nigel Farage, much more appealing than this Liz Truss lady. And we can create a whole new party with Nigel. A one-off party, right? Just to get it right. And it would be a big win if we get Nigel as the prime minister. I think it's going to happen. I thought he should have been prime minister right away after Boris. I don't know what he was doing, wasting time, not going right for the job. I told him that right away. I said, you're the natural prime minister. When I met him that time in 2017, I said, what are you doing? Go, just be the prime minister. Get these crazy people out of here. He didn't know, whatever. But we'll see next time. And then consistency. Look, China changing its whole plan out of nowhere. China changing its whole plan out of nowhere. Economics out the door. Security, right? Well, we think the world still is about economics, right? We think World War III is an economic war and Bitcoiners are going to win, right? We're D-Day, man. We're the D-Day operation here, right? It's up to us. All right, team. Any chats? Not a lot of chats today. What's up? That's all I got for today anyway, guys. Ciao, ciao. See ya.